The Vancouver Whitecaps are through to the MLS Western Conference Final after one of the most thrilling soccer games I think any of us have watched. I was up at 1 a.m. here. I think I was writing until 4 a.m. I wish I was there in Vancouver, but Alex, you were there in Vancouver. The Whitecaps beat LAFC. They slay the dragon, as Thomas Muller said after, although on Sakaris and Price earlier in the week, he said maybe the German way would be something that translates directly to more push the GOAT out of the way. But the GOAT could be coming up in an MLS Cup final. But Vancouver Whitecaps get past LAFC, 2-2 draw. Son Heung-min steals headlines with a 95th minute tying goal from a free kick. Just an unreal night, 55,000 at BC Place. Alex, what do you see from this one?
Yeah, I saw what I expected. I expected a grandstand haymaker match. I expected this to be one of the best playoff games in history. I mean, one can only be blessed with the possibility of hindsight, but I think looking back and seeing how New York City, Philly went, seeing how Minnesota, San Diego, rough watch, very rough watch. Seeing Miami, Cincinnati, man, someone called them Cincinnati, Portland East the other day, and I couldn't stop laughing at how accurate that was. Man, the Whitecaps, LAFC, it just felt like watching a different sport, right? Like just how entertaining, how thrilling it was, how it really was like a wrestling match. The way the Whitecaps, they came out on top, they kind of pinned LAFC down 2-0 at halftime, no shots for LAFC. Like, man, this is going to be domination. But then you're like, oh yeah, this LAFC team has too many stars. They've been through too many big games. They've won enough where they just turned it around. And then the game flipped on its head. But in the end, the Whitecaps down to 10 at one point, down to 9. At a certain point, it felt like Ben had texted me. I might have had to step up and take a kick. It felt like the way they were going through bodies, they get the job done. I just wanted to shout out a fantastic game. And it was just like, honestly, might have been one of the best Whitecaps atmospheres, probably the best I've been to, just because of the stakes. Like, this wasn't that Miami game earlier in the year where there's a bit of that curiosity, almost a bit of that circus-like factor with Miami. Everyone in that stadium, no matter if they were there for Sun or there for the Whitecaps, most of them were there for the Whitecaps. They understood that this was a one-off game. This was a knockout game. And it really felt like there was that atmosphere in there. And I think that's what was cool. Sometimes with the 54,000, like in that Miami game, there's not that same buzz. This felt like a true diehard crowd, Brendan.
It was a tie fit for a final, right? And so few finals actually live up to the hype. So maybe because it was only a second round matchup, we got that match the way that we did. And yeah, it would have been incredible to be at. It was incredible theater to watch. And then I love that the storylines, for as much as, Sun's free kick was exceptional and exactly what LAFC would have hoped for when they splashed the cash and gambled with a transfer fee of that record value and of that much money to bring in a guy that you hope could still perform at the level that he's been performing. For Thomas Muller to have been on the bench through all that, for us to be talking about Bilal Halbouni as a deciding factor in a match, it's pretty incredible, man. Matias Laborda also finishing it off to win the penalty shootout. It felt like a real full, kind of team experience, because even though this team is on a different level and a different trajectory with Thomas Muller, and have gotten here without, in large part, Ryan Gauld, it really has been, an incredible team to follow all the way through. And I'm really happy that we get to follow them again. It's just too bad that they're not meeting up against Dane Sinclair in the final, in the West final.
And I think there's something to be said about the atmosphere at BC Place as well, not only because it was a special opportunity for Vancouver sports, and Vancouver sports, had a amazing weekend when it comes to, the Golden Eyes opening up the PWHL before that, and the Canucks kind of made everybody forget about the good stuff the night after. But when you look at the stage that the MLS Cup playoffs often see, it's the soccer-specific stadiums. It's 30,000 person crowds, 25,000 person crowds. Very rarely do you get a 55,000 person crowd cheering on an MLS game with the stakes that high and everybody invested in the game, because we've seen those crowds for the likes of Lionel Messi in the past. And I know that there's been some El Tráfico games that have broken MLS attendance records at the Rose Bowl, but this was a stage that the MLS Cup playoffs hadn't seen in a while. And it's a shame that the Whitecaps don't have the ability to host MLS Cup against Miami, because that would be the spectacle that, MLS hasn't seen in a little while. The likelihood is Miami is hosting MLS Cup final at Shea Stadium, which is a temporary build. It's 18,000 fans. It's not the greatest stage, and these big moments should have the greatest stage. Pitch aside, I know that the Whitecaps pitch isn't great. Hugo Lloris came out with comments afterwards saying the pitch wasn't great. Fourth Division France is a little bit better. Well, the next day we see an MLS Cup semifinal or West semifinal on a football pitch as well. So, a good throwback to early MLS days for San Diego FC there. But just the stage that was for MLS, that's not something you see very often. And how important would it be for the Whitecaps to offer MLS that to give it a bit of a boost, Alex?
Well, it was everything, because it's something small that you don't pick up on the maybe in real time, but I think there was a tangible difference. And again, maybe this was because I was running on like 4 hours of sleep when I was watching Miami, Cincy the next day, and then New York, Philly was all at the same time. But there felt like a tangible difference of, man, like these games just don't match the stage of what, granted, I was in person for, but it just didn't feel right. And maybe you guys who watched them all from afar can compare, but it truly felt like watching that Philly game, like I saw pockets of empty seats. There just wasn't that same intensity. It's just crazy to think that, man, LAFC Whitecaps delivered a game, and this is all the same stage. Same goes for San Diego, Minnesota. It didn't feel like there's that same grandeur to it. There is definitely something to be said of the way Vancouver showed up for this match and the atmosphere they delivered, because it's easy to forget some of the best MLS Cup playoff games. For me, that backdrop is everything. I think of LAFC winning MLS Cup final in 22. The fact that they did it in front of a sold out bank at the time, I can get away with calling it bank and not BMO, whatever it's called nowadays. That made a world of difference, right? Like, I think if that game is in Chester, and again, no disrespect to Chester, they get a good crowd there, but there just isn't that same energy that you get at a full BMO stadium, or that you get at what we saw full BC Place. That the stage does have some part to play. And I think, Brendan, you could back that up with some of the best finals of the last decade was Toronto FC hosting, because the crowd there at BMO Field was incredible in 2016 and 2017. There is something to be said about those atmospheres adding a bit to the game and the players feeding off it, I find.
Yeah, I think the argument is twofold, right? Because the same people that are pro calendar flip and say, oh, it's 90% of the games are being played in the same time, and look, the playoffs will be in May. And honestly, maybe that does make Philly a bigger market and a better draw and more appealing in the playoffs. And I think that there's some like winning fatigue there with the Union, that they've been a great regular season team, similar to the Maple Leafs, but they've got that one MLS Cup final appearance, and they've got no trophies or really consistently long playoff runs for that market to really kind of buy in beyond the ceiling that it seems like they've capped, right? I think for the Whitecaps, what's incredible is that they've been able to max out and sell out their available seats. Like since August, they've put on such a show. And to my point earlier about it's been such a team effort, and there's been like new stars and a supporting cast kind of every night. And you really have had kind of 3 iterations of this team, I feel like, to get to this point here now towards the end of November. The empty pockets of seats and other markets and stuff, and having to be on the football gridiron in San Diego, that's just another example of MLS's schedule and the playoffs schedule being so crap and ruined because of the international breaks. And so again, in the spring, it'll be different now, right? And I really am growing to feel like this shift is better for the league, but I worry for the northern markets. All 3 Canadian teams, I could really see a future when we're talking at that Saudi World Cup 2034. Right? The Saudis are loaning out money for developing nations to build stadiums. I don't know if that applies to the lower mainland of Vancouver, but if it's just a phone call, somebody please pick up the phone and see if they can get that done, because I want the Whitecaps to stay in Vancouver for sure. But I said this to you guys, I really see a scenario come that time, early 2030s, where we don't have any Canadian teams in Major League Soccer, and that would be really disappointing. I hope that doesn't happen. So for as good as it's been to see 55,000 at BC Place, I hope that continues. I also looked at the schedule here to see that the Dolphins are away that weekend of the MLS Cup final. So I would imagine that someone has had some conversation about the potential of playing at Hard Rock, because yes, it would be awful to play at that scaffolding stadium in Fort Lauderdale, which we all got enough of in our one matchup there. I would really like to see, it be a spectacle. It is a showcase. And when they got away from having a neutral venue, they lost a bit of that control. And, they've had some great ones. LA is a great example. Toronto's been amazing. Seattle, of course, you're getting 70 every time Seattle's in it. But 55 for the Whitecaps is really, really cool. And I think you guys would have seen that Copa 90 piece that they did, was published this week, about going to the Canadian Championship final, and they'd gone to one league game, I think, as well. I know you guys know the history very well. A lot of people know. Anyone from Vancouver knows that there's two Vancouvers, the one that existed before Expo 86 and the one that existed after. But I didn't realize how much, that 79 team had a real role in the politics of changing the whole landscape of that city, which I thought was really cool. And I do, truly feel like we'll be talking about this new era, whether you want to call this Whitecaps 3.0 or this 2.0 MLS era, which is after Thomas Muller's arrival. And this is just another great moment for it. And I hope it continues with at least one more win.
Well, you're not a very close credits watcher, because both Alex and I were included in the credits of that Copa 90 documentary. Alex was actually interviewed by Elam Enjum, but his interview didn't make the cut, and I helped arrange some of the...
You were spiked. Oh, no. Left on the cutting room floor. No, I'm not much of a credit watcher, boys, but congrats. I'm glad you both contributed to it. I think it's part of why it was so dramatic and compelling.
And the Whitecaps, of course... Yes, huh? And the Whitecaps, of course, have the potential of hosting MLS Cup. It would have to come with a New York City FC upset of Inter Miami, and with the way that Miami's playing right now, that seems very unlikely. I mean, Messi has 12 goal contributions, 6 goals, 6 assists in 4 MLS playoff games. He's been on an absolute another level, and that team just looks unbeatable right now. I would say they're the outright MLS Cup favorites at this point. But the Whitecaps, of course, also have to beat San Diego FC. It's the best 2 teams in the Western Conference that make the West Final, as it should be. Regular season be damned. But I was looking at the past MLS Cup participants from the Western Conference, and only 3 times in the last 20 years has the regular season table topper made it to the MLS Cup, and only twice have they won MLS Cup. So there's actually one part of this matchup that does lean the Whitecaps' way, even though they didn't get a positive result against San Diego this season, Alex.
Yeah, but then, what is it? An expansion team has never made the final. So either way, you got an expansion team could make the final in their first year. You have the Whitecaps making their first ever final. It's historic either way. And you can go on the other side. You got, you got Miami looking for their first ever final. Of course, New York made a final and they won it in Cascadia a few years ago. So I'm sure they wouldn't hate a visit to Vancouver and try to build off what they did in, I guess that would have been 2021 now. How the time flies, with Sean Johnson out there penalty shootout hero in Portland that year. So
Delia, what a time.
That's it, when he stripped down to his skivvies and was dancing in the underwear with the MLS Cup trophy. So yeah, I think either way, there's a lot at stake. I mean, at this stage, when you make it this far, there's something in your favor. We have to remember last year, no one had in their right minds would have had the Red Bulls making the final. So I think for New York, Miami, it's tough because, look, Miami, like you mentioned, in terms of the way they've played, they're the odds-on favorite, just because whenever you have the best player, it kind of tilts your favor a bit more, right? When Messi is playing like Messi. But I will say one thing with New York, and kind of one of the reasons why, at least why I backed them against Philadelphia, and we'll see if this holds true against Miami. They do have the best goalkeeper left in the playoffs. Like, Matt Freese was incredible against Philadelphia. He was incredible against Charlotte. It's tough for New York. They lost Alonso Martinez. You could really see they were missing a bit of an outlet at times against Philadelphia. But it does help to have just a good goalkeeper. Clearly, Nashville, we saw how they felt about Joe Willis. They scrapped him right after that playoff series when they did their roster announcements. Cincinnati, I mean, I was not a fan of the way they were playing. I'm really sad Columbus didn't get past them, because I think Columbus, even as shorthanded as they are with all the injuries, would have given up more than a fight than Cincy did. Like, Cincy looked freaking awful in that game, the way they were getting carved through, and their back line, the spaces between it was ridiculous to watch. So I think New York City, it's a one-off game. If you keep it compact, you have a good goalkeeper. We'll see how this plays out. Whitecap San Diego is very interesting, though, because we know San Diego likes to hold the ball a bit more than LAFC has, or certainly Minnesota would have. There's a bit more of a toe-to-toe there. Andres Dreyer was a top 3 player in the league this year. for the Whitecaps, while they have a guy in Thomas Muller who can be a top 3 player, he's also not coming off the greatest of his games against LAFC. That was a bit of a forgotten storyline, that Muller didn't necessarily look at his best in that match and didn't even play the extra time. The San Diego Whitecaps matchup is going to be fascinating because I do think whoever comes out of it will have a bit of a psychological edge, because the gauntlet that the Whitecaps will have faced of going through LAFC in San Diego, or what San Diego will have gone through getting through the Whitecaps to get to the final, it does feel like Miami's cruised so much that because we saw this in CONCACAF. Miami kind of cruised through CONCACAF, and then when they hit the Whitecaps in the semis, they're like, oh shoot, like what is this? I do think that always helps teams when you kind of get battle tested. And that's why the Whitecaps playing LFC as early as it was, while it felt like a disadvantage had they lost, it's a big advantage now that they've gotten past it.
And Brendan, when you look at this matchup as well, of course, you see a player like Anders Dreyer. You see how the Whitecaps performed against San Diego this season. Do you favor the Whitecaps in this, or are they really the underdogs, even with a guy like Thomas Muller, who didn't play against San Diego? And of course, that big San Diego win was with Milan Orlowski, who is out of the MLS Cup playoffs with Philadelphia.
Yeah, I know. It's a totally different matchup for them, and it's one that, to me, the Whitecaps are definitely the favorites. I also feel that there's pressure on San Diego, albeit you'd think there wouldn't be, that they're an expansion team. They've been playing with house money the whole season, but they won the West. They're hosting this game. I think they will feel as though it's their game to lose. And the Whitecaps may feel like that to an extent, but having never been here before, having the momentum that they're coming off of, with the way they beat LAFC and just the way everything's kind of clicking, there's such a different mentality. There's quite a few players held over from those teams that Venu Sartini led to Canadian championships, and then they fell by the sword at the hands of LAFC. But this team is very, very different. The mentality, the grit, and I just take that over San Diego, which is a team that I think has been hitting punching above their weight all season. So I like the Whitecaps. I just wish this game was a BC place, honestly.
And when you look at this San Diego team as well, they have the number of players that can really exploit an injured Whitecaps team. There's not going to be Tristan Blackman in this game. He picked up that red card that made it so difficult against LAFC. You're probably having to play Ralph Priso at center back in this one, and Bilal Halbouni is unavailable as well. This is a very injury-riddled and red card-riddled Whitecaps team, Brendan. Is this just too much of a task for them, do you think? Do you think they're still the favorites with all these injuries?
They're going to have their hands full. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't love, and Jesper Sorensen would say this too, don't love the idea of Ralph Priso being your starting center back in a playoff game in this must-win scenario, but also at center back, he's been pretty good. And I think everyone around him, the way they played as a unit, like if you hadn't been following them regularly, you wouldn't have known that they were in the dire straits that they were, with injuries for much of the season, right? And in that stretch too, where they really were battered and bruised, like they had a decent record once they came out of the diarrhea contest, right? Once they shook that off after Mexico, they got back to themselves and their winning ways that we saw, earlier in that run to the CONCACAF Champions Cup final. So I do like their chances, honestly. I just think that they've got much more belief, and the fact really that they haven't had to just rely on 2 or 3 pieces, which was the last 4 years, right? It was, for them to win, Gauld had to be at his best. Brian White had to be at his best. And then you just hope that maybe, you've got a goal from Fafa Picault or someone supportive, and it was enough and you didn't concede too much more. That's not the case now, right? So I still think that as a team collectively, they have a lot to make it very difficult for San Diego, and they will go there believing they should win it.
Okay, you got to check the biases at the door, I think, for Ralph Priso. What more does the guy have to do? He puts in an absolute shift in Seattle a few months ago. We're like, okay, maybe he can play center back. In the Dallas series, in that deciding game, he ends up like arguably being the player of the match, scores an equalizer after a great performance and gets him through. And then in this game, in a game where the defender of the year returned from injury and started alongside him, Priso was the best center back. He was phenomenal against LAFC. The way he was bodying guys, dribbling out of pressure. I can't believe that was the same player that 12 months ago the Whitecaps kind of scrapped off of not the waiver pile, but it felt like a hockey waiver pickup. You're just taking a flyer on a guy and hoping he ends up being semi-serviceable, and somehow Jesper Sorensen has unleashed this monster of a player that we didn't know existed. If anything, you'd argue Laborda, Priso, if that's what they're going with, might be their best center backs right now based on the form that those two are in relative to the way Blackman just didn't look like himself in that game. Maybe him having the weekend off to refocus for a potential MLS Cup final should the Whitecaps get that far is exactly what the doctor ordered. And who knows? We'll see if there's any sort of appeal or rescinding process. But that's the thing with the Whitecaps. It's like you mentioned, Brendan, with San Diego, the way I look at it, and you saw this play out so far, these playoffs, this team is going to go as far as Anders Dreyer takes them. He scored a fantastic goal against Minnesota, and they won that game. You saw it in the Portland series when he was on one. He was unplayable, and they won. But when he was, maybe not, when his defense was struggling, maybe wasn't in that win games by himself mode, it's different. Whereas the Whitecaps, like we mentioned, Muller had a not by his standards game against LAFC. Brian White only played 60 and then came off because he's not fit to go more than that. Like we mentioned, Blackman got sent off after a bit of a rough game. Gauld played 60 minutes, which is good to know he can play that much. Don't think he planned to play 60 minutes like that. But there was so much that could have went wrong, but it's always next man up. And I think that's encouraging for the Whitecaps, that the list of things that can go wrong and they'll still be fine is a lot longer than what San Diego can go through. And I think in a playoff game on the road against an expansion team that has never been this far, I think that does give the Whitecaps a bit of an edge, that even if it's comes down to Priso, Laborde at center back and whatever else gets thrown at them, they'll find a way. Like, this is a team that was confident to throw Rayan Alumi for the last 30 minutes of this LAFC game. That's not happening even if they were playing Dallas a year ago under Vanni Sartini. It just shows how far they've come in the last 12 months.
And you guys know I love my predictions. So if you were to predict the MLS Conference Finals, of course, in the West, it's Vancouver versus San Diego. I'm going to say 2-1 San Diego. I think the injuries just catch up to the Vancouver Whitecaps in this one. And in the East, I'm going to go 3-1 Inter Miami. Messi's just been on another level. I'll go 1 goal, 2 assists for Messi in that one. But Alex, predictions for the Conference Finals.
Yes, you love a good prediction. Well, Miami's going to beat New York City. That one's going to be a tough one, like a 2-1. I've liked New York these playoffs, fun to watch. And then in the Whitecaps, San Diego, I think the Whitecaps, they just get it done. I think their underlying numbers, like we mentioned, a lot of the strengths. Yes, playing away in San Diego is tough. Last time they went down there, they got a draw. They probably should have won, but that was the Ranko Veselinovic injury game. I think the Whitecaps grind out another tough match, and then you get a Whitecaps Miami final, Muller Messi. I don't think anyone would have seen that one coming a few months ago.
Yeah, except Apple and everyone who interviewed Thomas Muller early in the season to ignite that rivalry between Bayern Munich and Barcelona and bring up those old days, which I love how Muller is leaning into. I don't think I've enjoyed someone adjusting to a new league more than Thomas Muller adjusting to Major League Soccer and Vancouver. And I feel, just as a Canadian, grateful that it's here in Canada. And I really hope that the spark can be even bigger than just what we've seen in the lower mainland. And it will when they're in the final. And they're going to get there because they're going to win in a penalty shootout again after a 2-2 draw in San Diego. And they will be able to go home and host the final because New York City is going to upset Miami 2-1. Boom. You know why I favor New York in this matchup? Because they're away. And every time New York has had a long playoff run, and this should end in the Eastern Conference Final, but every time they've had a long playoff run, they've been a lower seed, and they've won more games on the road. Whether they have to win all games on the road, I just feel like it's away from home when you have underrated New York, that they have actually been pretty successful. And this Miami team is imbalanced. So they are beatable. And New York will feel up for it. And New York will feel no pressure, right? And we've seen Miami buckle under pressure earlier in the year. Yes, this is what they've been playing for. But the way that Messi, has the ability to turn the game on its head in one moment, I think that there's a potential that they could be outmatched, and that New York will find their moments, take them, and I think hang on to it. To give us a real upset.
Who would have thought that New York is more comfortable when their right back's running down a touchline and not the third baseline? Just throwing that out there.
You can only dream of what that New York team is going to look like when they get their own stadium as well, in an actual football pitch at Etihad Stadium.